Namaskar and welcome to this exciting episode of Sattology, Debunking Mythology. Sattology means science of truth, the study of truth. Opposite of that is mythology, which means science or study of fake, lie, or imagination. Sattology builds your identity, whereas mythology actually destroys your identity. You know who is the guest today? And because I'm going to use some adjectives, he's a rishi, muni, sadhaka, and a wonderful researcher. And many of you like his and mine shows, but the credit goes to him more. So let us welcome Nilesh Nilkant Oak.
Namaskar Aditya and happy to be here on Saturday.
Namaskar and welcome. So Nilesh ji, everybody talks about peace nowadays. Peace, 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 peace. And Krishna says in Bhagavad Gita, Bhoktaram Vikitapasam Sarvalokam Suridam Sarvabhutaram Gyatva Mam Shantim Richati. One who knows Krishna attains peace. But there are people who only talk about peace. There should be no war. There should be what is happening in Europe and other places wrong. And they keep on saying like that. But nobody actually does any effort for peace. You know. So what do you think is the main reason behind it?
Great question. Main reason Aditya is given in the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita. Okay, the Asuri Vritti and Asuri Pravritti.
That's right.
So of course, one thing on the tongue and other things, something behind. So they are using the peace because the word peace is very powerful. In fact, not far from where you are, at the university there. I will not mention the university, not because it's a secret, but rather I want people to find out on their own. And I know reasonable about that program. It's the program itself is called like a center or department, you can say, for international justice and peace. But what happens is essentially it is a center that gets utilized by American interest to basically do whatever they want to do, which almost contradicts the words justice and peace around the world. So as you ask, like, okay, so they talk about the peace, but nobody really wants to do anything actively or actually does it. You can find, see, that's why, I mean, people ask Aditya like, why study Itihasa? Like, come on, that's past. And I think about the now and the future. Well, if you truly want to think about the now and the future, then it's not like you have to think of the past. You have to understand the past because it's not that different. For example, say grown-up people, when they look at the young crowd, I mean, we have a university crowd, but colleges, but young crowd, and the young crowd just think, I mean, say somebody falling in love. It's like, hey, I am the first one in the whole world falling in love, or all the emotions that they would feel. Guess what? The grown-ups have gone through that stage and they have seen the pluses and minuses, and they have a better simhavalokan, like retrospect for what happened, what could be done right, what could be done wrong, where the mistake happens, how certain things do not matter in the long run. So that perspective is what we get from a Itihasa. So just to answer the second aspect, or rather additional point on answering your question on people talk of peace, but they don't mean it. Rather, they work exactly against, and you can see this on, open the TV and hear about the Ukraine war, and, America just loving to provide the weapons. All the weapons factories here are happy, something is going to happen finally. Almost think of it, some of the weapons, not all, but some of the weapons have an expiry date. So by the expiry date, they want to be get consumed rather than just totally wasteful. This is almost how demonic thinking works. And if you go back 7,500 years ago to Mahabharata times, practically there is no historical record anywhere else in the world except in India, as it happens, that record. I mean, sometimes you will see monuments that will go back, like say Indonesia, if you go to Gunung Padang, it will go to 22,000 BC and so on. But no record in the sense of written records that only can be found or have survived in India. So going back 7,500 years ago to the time of Mahabharata, and Dhritarashtra is that blind guy. Now see, he's literally blind, Adityaji, but also intellectually and from a mind perspective, he's also blind. He is so blind to his very narrow personal family interest, not even a extended family, because with whom his sons are fighting and he himself is in a way fighting, are his, are basically the children of his brother. But his interest is so narrow minded, so narrowly focused, that he doesn't realize it is his own destruction. So he uses peace. Actually, he says, I want also this war to stop. I also want peace. But what can I do? My sons don't listen to me. But if you listen to these his conversations with his son and his close relatives, you'll be surprised. I mean, you won't be surprised, but anyone reading Mahabharata would be surprised how much he is so much attached. And Adityaji, if you have to summarize it, this is a particular case study, but the essential, basic, fundamental philosophy is there in the 16th chapter of Bhagavad Gita, as Daivi and Asuri Vritti, or Daivi and Asuri Pravrutti. And yeah, that's what it is. The Asuri Pravrutti is, this is mine and I'm happy, but I want that thing is somebody else. I also want it. I want to be always in control of the things. I want to be the most powerful guy. I want to be the most richest person. It comes from that delusion, that, I mean, how much we, all of us, need resources, but how much, or how much resources, or how many resources we need. At a certain point, there is a limit to it. When that is lost, the Asuri Pravritti begins. Back to you, Adityaji.
Actually, what a wonderful this thing. You're correctly right, because in the 16th chapter is very clearly mentioned, and also 16th chapter also mentions about the Shastra Vidhi Musrijya Vartate Kamakarata. Like, people actually reject the Shastra. Shastra is only one, Vedic Shastra. There is no other Shastra. And like, there are, if you say in English, there are only scriptures are Vedic scriptures. That everything else changes, or opinions, or somebody's modern viewpoint. Modern is itself a very bad word, because modern, what does modern mean? Like, my definition of modern is that what stays ultimately is modern.
Yeah.
And old solutions for new problems. Like, the
Yes.
currently all the problems are new, like the mental diseases are new and other diseases are new, but the solution is still the old: haldi milk, eat haldi, the same old solution: jeera, haldi.
Correct.
Okay, like cumin seeds or turmeric, these are the old
Yeah.
solutions, but new diseases also tackled by the old solutions. Is just one
Correct.
example. You cannot
Yeah.
stretch an example to something else. But and also the, like, the big oldest solution mentioned in Bhagavad Gita is moving beyond your mind, controlling your
Hmm.
mind. Still old solution, but problems are new. So ultimately, it
Right.
all boils down to that. So in this context, if you see, then the only thing modern remaining is yoga. Nothing else is modern, because there's
Yeah.
an old solution. Ayurveda is an old solution, modern
Correct.
problems.
Yeah.
And what you keep mentioning, I mean, you do a wonderful work on dating side of scriptures, our history, actually, the Mahabharata, Ramayana. So the solution is old. That learn wisdom from Mahabharata, Ramayana. Problems are new.
Correct.
Peace. Like, how do you get
Correct.
peace? I mean, if you all of you are trying to snatch up somebody else's property, how will you get peace? So, what is
Correct.
your
And
view on
the
that in
disease is,
between?
yeah, the disease is also old. It's called Bhava Roga, that many people don't realize, right? That's why the solution is also same. Or even just at a bodily level, you mentioned like different disease comes, the COVID came. Ultimately, it goes to what? Boost your immune system.
That's right.
Right? So that is the solution. Now, how you boost immune system may change from location to location,
Correct.
right? Whatever the local ingredients that are available, but essence is same, or still is a C vitamin, and still it is a perfect blend of spices and whatnot.
Let's begin the your show today, and I think it's a wonderful topic. Amazing.
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah. So, I mean, not everyone will able to necessarily continue to attend, but I must mention the name so that, they can watch it afterwards in alternate means when possible. Is we are going to talk about four dancing girls of Jupiter and seven hands of Saturn. And in this, actually, let me start sharing. And in this context, the very fascinating, I mean, this is a golden page, a golden chapter And every chapter is, by the way, golden or platinum when it comes to ancient Indian astronomy. But I wanted to call it because unless Aditya ji, this Kali Yuga, what happens is Kali Yuga began like 7,583 years ago, and Jivan Rao's book is going to show right on the money why that is so. Uh, so 7,500 years is a long time, and we are getting our focus. We are very short attention span, and maybe smartphone exaggerated or accelerated that particular degradation, we can say. So people need to be even told that, I talk about in some talks, like, we have to tell people when they should feel goosebumps, when they should feel excited. And
And
sorry, you were going to say something. Go ahead. Yeah.
and one thing I'll say how it is correct is because Vyasdev, and have to get out the reference actually.
Hmm.
Somewhere says that 3,000 years after the Mahabharata war, there was no war in the world.
Hmm.
And the
Hmm.
modern historians say the 4,000 years back is their history begins. Just
Hmm.
so
Hmm.
in that way, it fits in actually. 3,000 years after the Mahabharata war, there was no war.
Huh. And then 4,000 years ago, when their history began, it began with the wars. And
Exactly.
and that has not stopped per se,
Not stop. Yes.
Right. But just like I said, people even these days need to be told when to clap. I mean, you see this with our sitcoms, right? There is a artificial laughter and artificial clapping. So the person watching would also know I supposed to laugh here or I supposed to clap. In some sense, that therefore I just added the word. Not actually, I don't need to add. They are there, but that's how far we have come to, which is to say, magic and mystery of ancient Indian astronomy, the four dancing girls of Jupiter and seven hands of Saturn. Okay, let me get into the subject. Now, today, those people who are remotely, I mean, even at a very elementary level, comfortable or aware of basic planets, like our planets of solar system, they learn in the elementary school, middle school, multiple times, Google, NASA program, not a surprise. I mean, immediately people will able to relate what I might be referring to: four dancing girls of Jupiter and seven hands of Saturn. What many people may not know, and some would know, is that as far as the entire Western Europe is concerned, and therefore America, because from there, if you just go back 400 years, just 400 years, guys, okay? Just for simplicity, if you want to make it 500, simple to remember, fine. The Western Europe and therefore America, rest of the world, was simply not aware of these four dancing girls of Jupiter and seven hands of Saturn. Now, actually, we know more, more dancing girls of Jupiter and more hands of Saturn. But that's where the magic and mystery of ancient Indian astronomy comes in picture. Okay, so I just picked a picture to get your visualization and imagination flowing. So think of this as the left side picture as if like this is Jupiter at the center, and I will put a Jupiter sign here afterwards. And imagine four dancing girls, and here seven hands of Saturn. So what are these? Now, of course, I will give you the answer, but the mystery and the magic is left into the discovery of it. Not the discovery in the way sort of a Christians, the papal bull came and said to Portuguese, like, hey, go to the east and exploit the rest of the world, and in the process they ended up exploiting, destroying, torturing, and so on. And to the Spain they sent, go into the west world, go exploit, torture, make yourself rich and therefore make the church rich. A very unfortunate chapter in the history of humanity. But that's not a subject. My point is, before these guys went there in search of wealth, search of land, exploitation, okay, stealing of wealth of other countries, getting the rights for the business, becoming rich in the process. But even they did not, I mean, Aditya, think of it, they did not know how to retain the wealth because of that Asuri Pravrutti, the 16th chapter we talked about. Therefore, if you look at Portugal right now or Spain, they are not in a good position, although they destroyed the world. And that's where we can also, I don't mean just as a country, I mean, I have great friends in Spain and all, so it's not about that, but so is India. I mean, if you do a bad thing, the karma vipaka siddhanta will come and bite you in the back. I mean, that's just nature of a karma. But the point I want to say is they, in the process, they became aware of the wealth of knowledge of India. of various fields: agriculture, metallurgy, shipbuilding, navigation, astronomy, spices, medicine, Ayurveda, philosophy. I mean, a lot of things. We are taking just as a thin slice of out of it, and out, which is astronomy. Out of the thin slice, we are taking another angstrom, nanostrom, nanometers thin slice, and just talking about it, and just want to tell you how fascinating and magical it is. In the context of Mahabharat, okay, which is the one I referred to, the blind king talking peace, okay, by mouth, but inside he doesn't mean a damn thing. Okay, inside he wants his party to fight his cousin brother's son, and basically even the kingdom that he has taken in a wrongful means, he wants to retain it, okay, and wants to grow. In that context, what you're seeing on the screen, and a number of you would not able to read it, that's in one of the perfect language, one of the perfect, I'm just saying in a very euphemistic way, in a humble way. It's a Sanskrita, it's like mathematically, logically, scientifically produced, created, so that the records are retained without we losing the meaning of it. So a very little drift in the language. That's how perfect this language is. So something that was composed 7,500 years ago, of course, there has to be a continuation of civilization, which fortunately existed in India. Possibly, Adityaji, you mentioned no war for 3,000 years after Mahabharata. That possibly helped somehow, although there was a huge destruction at that time, but allowed to make this survive. Then it got destroyed in the last about 1,500 years. Okay, significant destruction. And possibly before that also. But what you are saying here, if you cannot read, that's fine. That's not the main subject of it. There are 4 specific pieces of evidence. What is beautiful, guys? Something that is composed 7,500 years ago, noting down the positions of Saturn and Jupiter in the sky. Guess what? The language, the beauty of Sanskrit is such, the perfect language, but with a no to little drift. There is some drift. Some words slightly change. Over a time, just like the words get different meanings, I'll give you a simple example, like say window and files and folders. Before computers came, the window meant something different, and files meant something different, and folder meant something different, which we still have, by the way. The physical file exists, and physical folder exists, and physical window exists. But in a computer jargon, it means something different. Something similar occasionally has also happened to Sanskrit. But the beauty is Sanskrit still retains the original meaning of it, and there is a reason for it. In many cases, for example, I'm just taking English as an example that will apply to many other languages. The word has come into being by simple convention. Like, window, what we consider window, why is it called window? I mean, window may have a meaning. My point is, it may not have any reason other than saying, oh, we used to always call it window. And if you try to go at the root of it, like a etymology, you may not always find the roots. That is not the case with Sanskrit language. That's why it is a perfect language. It's Sanskrita. It is a manufactured language, okay, based on the languages spoken in India in a very deep ancient times. We are talking thousands and thousands of years ago. We just don't know exactly when. Okay, some of the literature that has survived in an oral tradition like Vedas and Upanishad and others, they go back thousands of years. And I say thousands of years, some people will say, oh, do you mean, Nilesh, 2,000 years ago, 3,000? Therefore, when I say thousands of years, let me also mention, I'm not talking 2,000, 3,000, 4,000, 5,000 years. Guys, it just doesn't even cut it. Okay. Mahabharata event, because the whole history from the Western perspective did not begin or got connected with the Jesus, that's anything before Jesus is a prehistory. India doesn't have a concept of a prehistory. It's always a history. It's a Itihasa. And we're talking of tens of thousands of years. You say, oh, okay, so you mean 10,000? Nah, it doesn't even cut it. We just barely scratch the surface. We're talking of 10,000, 20,000, 30,000, 40,000, 50,000, 60,000, on and on. And this is not a gaudy stuff. This is not some raw stuff like, just to impress. Oh my God, 80,000 years. No, there is evidence for it. One of the beautiful evidence comes from Mahabharata or from astronomy. But today, let's not even go that far. Let's just go to 7,500 years. And the four girls of dancing girls of Jupiter and seven arms, seven hands of Saturn. Let's not even go back to 1,000 years. Let's just go back to 200 years. Okay, 200 plus years. And let me show you how fascinating the knowledge was. And this is not in some university of India. This is not some among very educated circles. This is like what would be equivalent here? Like somebody working at the city hall, a clerk working at a city hall equivalent in India. And it was such a second nature knowledge about the four dancing girls of Jupiter and seven hands of Saturn. That's what we'll talk about. But what I'm showing you here is a descriptions of the sky related to planets Jupiter and Saturn. This is all what you're seeing is a Jupiter descriptions. Four different descriptions made 7,583 years ago. In fact, these descriptions allow us to track it down to 7,583 years ago. We can say, oh, this, whatever is been described here, happened 7,583 years ago. And somebody will say, well, how can it be so precise? I mean, do you mean like 7,500 years ago? No, I mean 7,583 years ago. Oh, so you mean approximately 7,583 plus minus 5 years? Now, 7,583. Okay. Plus minus, there is no plus minus. As far as the evidence goes, it will go plus minus 1 year because Adityaji, this is important to understand. That way you can nail it down to 7,583. Like think of it as buying a furniture at IKEA. And when we assemble that furniture, you will notice that actually when you put two parts together, there is a deliberate mismatch. I mean, appears to be a deliberate mismatch. It's not a mismatch. It's deliberate. That's true. Therefore, when you put it together, it perfectly fits, like snap fit. And we know, oh, it's a perfect assembly. It's like that. The reason they are given over a period of plus minus 1 year is that way you can perfectly put together as a perfect snap fit, and that takes you to 7,583 years. Now, are we talking of just 1 year anytime within the 1 year? No. The Mahabharata war happened 18 days, and we know exactly with those 18 days. We know exactly where it began. We know exactly where it stopped. So this evidence is one such. And I'll come to the reference of these four girls, dancing girls, and where do they come in picture. For Saturn, we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. For Jupiter, we have 4 pieces of evidence. For Saturn, we have 6. Again, these are given in exactly the same format. Think of it again, the IKEA furniture, okay? And you are assembling it. The idea is, therefore, it snap fits, and therefore, it gives you a precise answer. Now, out of this, if you would have noticed, there is one particular reference. Again, if you cannot read Nagari, then you will not be able to notice that. This reference here from Bhishma Parva, from the huge text, the longest text of humanity, okay, the history text, 125,000 verses. And then if you want to add Harivansha, the appendix, it will even go further. That one particular reference piece that is given has both Jupiter and Saturn. And in that context, I'm going to describe the 4 dancing girls of Jupiter and 7 hands of Saturn. So what does the verse say? So I will read it and I'll translate it for you. So Graho Tamra Runashikho Prajvalanta Vivastito Saptarshinam Udaranam Samavachadya Vaiprabham Samvatsara Sthayinaucha Graho Prajvalita Vubho Vishakhayo Samipasto Bruhaspati Shaneshcharo. Another beauty I would mention, I might have mentioned it in the past. If you want to understand, and this is, I should give a should meaning because, that's how I learned. So I would give what you say, my acknowledgement and a credit and appreciation and a thanks to great Sanskrit professor, Professor Gauri Mahulikar. So, I can say she can kind of taught me, of course, not personally to me, but I was in the audience, but she was also explaining it to others and so beautifully explained. It says, if you want to understand the meaning of it, now this is just one technique. It's called heuristics. In some cases, it may not necessarily apply. That doesn't matter. Why do Aditya say it? There are extremely narrow-minded Sanskrit experts. And so if I just say it, they say, well, not true. Because they have no idea that exceptions prove the rule. Okay, so what we're talking here is a heuristics. What Gauriji says is, say, if you want to understand the meaning in a very proper fashion, and I have found this extremely fascinating. He said, once you read it, and now these four lines are connected with each other, they all are talking about Jupiter and Saturn and various aspects of them. So how do you understand them? She said, I mean, and this must be well known among the Sanskrit researchers or people who know Sanskrit. Now I know for many years, but I didn't know that, at least I know for a few years. She says, always start from the end. So we will do that, okay? I mean, there is no ready translation here that I could pull. And actually, many translations are so lousy, so irritating, they almost take the meaning away and also take the beauty of translation away. Okay, and we should be still thankful to them that they make an attempt. It's not easy. It helps, Adityaji, if you start from the back, and you will also love it. So if you want to understand the meaning of this, you start from the end. So last word, Brahaspati Shaneshcharo. It says Jupiter and Saturn. Okay, what about them? Samipasto, Jupiter and Saturn were settled near Vishakhayo. So Brahaspati, Jupiter and Saturn were settled near Nakshatra Vishakha. That last line we translated. Now let's come to the second last line. We start again from the last word. Prajvalita Ubho. So Jupiter and Saturn were settled near Vishakha, and both of them have become bright. Now go to the previous word, Graho. Okay, these planets. So some person, in case someone doesn't know what is Brahaspati Shaneshcharo, is saying Graho, the planets. Okay, fine. So we know who, we know where they had settled, we know some additional information about them, that they have become bright. And it says how long. Samvatsara Sthainancho. Actually, two pieces of information. For up to a year, and they have become steady, they have become settled near Vishakha. We did the last two lines. Let's go to the second last line. Prabham. Okay, something bright. Samavachadya Vaye Prabham. Okay, so covering the brightness of something. Of what? Saptarshinam Udaranam, of Saptarshi. So Jupiter and Saturn were near Vishakha. They had become bright for up to a year, become steady, and they were covering the brightness of Saptarshi. You see how the translation comes out. And now the first line. Sthito. Sthayino is already given. They're saying, okay, and by the way, they have become steady. Prajvalinta Vivo. And they had become fiery. See, it's mentioned twice. Tamra Runashikho. And of course, Graha. And so these have become bright, and also these two planets with extended bright coppery extensions, coppery shikha, bright coppery shikha, Tamra Runa Shikho, bright coppery extensions. That's what it is. Now, everything else will not go there. That actually, the last two lines, for example, help us nail it down to 7,583 years ago. But that Tamra Runashikho is what we are going to look at, because that has to do with the four dancing girls of Jupiter and seven hands of Saturn. Tamra Runashikho. What Vyasadev, the author, the composer of Mahabharata, is writing 7,500 plus years ago, that these two planets in this particular position, they were there, they were bright, they have become settled, were there for up to a year, so bright that they had dimmed the brightness of the Saptarshi. What is Saptarshi? The panhandle, okay, the big bear, that area. And they were shining with their bright coppery extensions. And this has confused many, I mean, all students of Mahabharata. So the scope of discussion is the Jupiter and Saturn with coppery extensions, right? And what could be these coppery extensions described by Bhagwan Vyasa? And that's where the four dancing girls of Jupiter and seven hands of Saturn come in picture. Quickly looking at Sanskrit, again, the beauty of Sanskrit is, now sometime Aditya ji, it is misunderstood point. Sanskrit is a very perfect language. Okay, in this way, just like I, as a crude example, metaphor, I gave the example of our IKEA furniture. So if you sometime, not always, depending on what you purchase, but you look at it and say, is it going to fit in the whole? For example, those of you who have used IKEA furniture, you'll see sometime when you are finally tightening something, with the nut bolts and Allen key, you'll find the holes where you put the nut and bolt, they don't exactly match, especially when you put a top piece on something and just do it. And those of you who know why it is so, the carpentry principle, you know it. But others who don't know, they will say, is this a manufacturing defect? No, it's a manufacturing perfection. The way, therefore, it is bit of misaligned is that's what ensures that the tight fit, the proper fit. Bringing that back to Sanskrit, many times you will hear, Sanskrit, Aditya ji would also say it many times, and he's right. The Sanskrit word meaning is such that it is there, it doesn't change, it's always perfect, it's always the same. Yes, it is true. But just like I told you about this ingenuity into IKEA furniture, a particular Sanskrit word can have many meanings. Actually, it does. Okay. And it goes the other way too within Sanskrit. So, for example, look at the screen, Shikha. That previous page had that word. What was that word here? Tamra Rona Shikho. Okay. So, that's the word we are looking at. Shikha means many, many different meanings. And I have just given few here. If you go and look at Sanskrit dictionary, you will find 20 others. So, this is one way of looking at it. Another way is, if you want to see a word such as, say, sun or moon or water or fire or air, you'll be surprised how many different words there are in Sanskrit for air, for fire, for whatever I said just now, let's say moon, sun, and so on. So there is a other way too, but in this case, the other side, which is the same word and has many meanings. Now, someone will think this can be very confusing. Well, it's not confusing, just like that IKEA furniture. It's meant because when those words come in contact together, they achieve something more. And this is basically what in a simple ordinary mathematics or in philosophy we will, or in business we will call 1 plus 1 equal to 3. When those two words come together as a sandhi, as it attains a meaning which is not just a cumulative or a linear addition of those two words. They attain something much more. For example, yoga kshema. Some Bhagavad Gita has a word yoga, like Aditya ji referred to it. Yoga, many people immediately imagine the exercise poses. That's just a small part of it. Very important part, but small, very small part of it. Yoga kshema. Now, you would understand the meaning of a yoga, you would understand the meaning of a kshema. What is interesting is when the word comes together, it attains a very different meaning. That is the process of a nirukta. Okay, so whereas when you look at in the Vyakarana sense, like sandhi, two words coming together, merging and different things, we go to the root of the word, like sometimes what we consider etymology. And nirukta is the etymology, equivalent to etymology. It's not a perfect translation. Because if you want to think nirukta, you want to think in terms of a adhyatmic thing. Just like yoga and a kshema, individually words may have a meaning, but when yoga kshema comes together, it is not a cumulative meaning. Yoga kshema has a much deeper emotional, philosophical, and therefore I'm saying adhyatmic meaning. Just quickly back to Shikha. So Shikha means spike, Shikha means sharp end, Shikha means projection, Shikha means pointed flame, Shikha means plum, Shikha means peacock's crest or comb, Shikha means nipple, and many, many, many other meanings. Just so that this is just a word, padadnyan, okay, or shabdadnyan, just so that you can start visualizing with it. I have got some pictures which kind of points to these various meanings. Now suddenly the picture emerges. And now you'll start seeing that Prajwalita Ubhav and the Tamra Runashikho. What is the significance, possibly significance of that in the context of Jupiter and Saturn? So here we have a spike coming out of the cap, or peacock's crest, okay, or the comb there. Some animals have like a tail, ponytail, like you see a Hindu boy there, okay, and has a Sikha at the end. Or think of the volcanic eruption, and that top eruption cloud could be seen as a Shikha extension, and so on, like pointed flame, for example. So you get to see different examples. With that knowledge, we are going to go and look at what could be this bright coppery extension that Vasudev is referring to. Let's begin with something else we know about these two planets, Jupiter and Saturn. Okay, now not many people necessarily know it, but if you don't know, not a big deal, because as far as the modern science is concerned, the rings of Jupiter were not known for that long. Okay, for a long time, they were actually not known. They are known like in the last 50, 60 years, although people had some hunches, like, even in modern times, like, yeah, could there be like that? What do I see? When especially they are looking through a better telescopes. Relatively speaking, Saturn's rings are well known for a relatively long time. So one way we are now trying to understand those Tamra Runashiko, could those be these rings of uh, Saturn and Jupiter? Yeah, they can be. I am going to say they are not, because I think there is a better explanation for this. But if those rings are there, then we have to also change our understanding about our ancient past. That is another reason why we must study history. It is very easy to become arrogant and cocky, about our latest gadgets. Rightfully so. We should enjoy them because it's just fascinating, like the way we communicate, the Zoom and telephones and smartphones and aeroplanes. Absolutely, it's fascinating stuff. Okay. I mean, that is the celebration of different branch of sciences, like science itself, the method of science, the Nyaya Darshana, India's Nyaya Darshana, which is the foundation of modern science. So yes, it's very fascinating, but it can make us arrogant if we do not have a long-term perspective. And I don't mean long-term in future, but even long-term in the past. Okay, we don't know how, but that's not a subject today. There are other astronomy observations in Mahabharata where I have shown that the telescopic ability that existed 7,500 years ago is unbelievable. Unbelievable. It matches what possibly Hubble telescope can see only outside the Earth's atmosphere, or even it possibly does better. I mean, I have to go and look at some of the resolutions possibly required for those kind of observations, but maybe Hubble still has a better one for two reasons: some of the latest developments, and also the fact it is outside our Earth's space, I mean Earth's atmosphere. But it is that fascinating what Vasudeva has done. And I'm not talking of Jupiter and Saturn, but again, that's not a subject, so I'll come back to this. It's my considered opinion. By when I say opinion, it's my assertion that these are not the ones, although they could be, because this is, as far as the visible planets are concerned, these are the only two planets, Jupiter and Saturn, who has rings. Now, if you go outside, Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, they do. But I mean, there are a couple other, Uranus and Neptune, who also have faint rings. Okay. But as far as the visible planets, these two, and the rings of Jupiter are not easy to see, even with the binoculars. You cannot see with the binoculars. With a very dark skies, very high quality telescope, like a telescope labs, literally, there you will able to see them. Okay. Saturn rings are not that bad. You can actually see with a binocular, especially if you don't hold in the hand, but you mount it, okay, and focus and focus it, and you will able to see it if the sky is dark and Saturn has a right orientation. But anyways, I talked enough about it. No, those I don't. I want to show this to you. These could be, in principle, the bright coppery extensions, but I think not, because they are not also easy to see, especially in case of Jupiter. But there is a better explanation. Now, what I'm showing you is what I am asserting is what Bhagwan Vyasadeva is referring to as the Tamra Runashikho for both Jupiter and Saturn. And what are those? Not a surprise, guys, in our time. I'm referring to these satellites, the moons of Jupiter and moons of Saturn. What you are seeing here, now this is like ordinary, with an ordinary telescope, a decent telescope from the Earth, and not necessarily very dark skies either. Okay, I mean, I can tell you guys, with good binoculars, I have seen. No, this is going back possibly 20 plus years. I have seen the moons of Jupiter with the binoculars right inside Detroit. And the Detroit skies are not the bright, not the dark skies. Okay. So I'm saying the right time, right place, certain circumstances you can see. But if, especially if you have a dark skies, a good binocular, good telescope, you will able to see them. And Vasa is referring to them. Okay, so you can see the connection of the Shikha now. How can somebody can look at the moons of Jupiter and perceive them as the Tamra Aruna Shikha, ditto for Saturn. So I kind of took the birds like a peacock or other birds, the ponytail bird with that picture, or a cap with the spike, and aligned them so that you can see why they could be described by Vasudev as Tamra Aruna Shikha. Okay. Now, what I want to tell you is the history, again, the Itihasa of these satellites and moon. Now, if somebody asks you, okay, so when were these moons of Jupiter were identified? Immediately, most of you will able to shout out the name. And you would be right, by the way. Can you think of a name before I blurt it out? Yeah, the name is Galileo. But don't forget, we are talking of Galileo as far as the Western Europe, and they coming out of the dogmatic religious context sometime in the Renaissance, European Renaissance, 500 years ago, and actually died down in a way. I mean, the dogma kind of returned, with the, that's not a subject today, but the Protestants, conversion, and so on and so forth. But what you see here is that Galileo, in the modern last 500 years, and as far as the Europe and the West is concerned, they were the first. I mean, Galileo was the first one to notice them. What the pictures that you guys are seeing right now are much improved, much brighter, more clear than Galileo ever saw. Okay, the instruments that time were not that sophisticated, but at least he was the one to notice it. And the church and a pope were not willing to believe. I don't know if you know the story. When Galileo wanted the church folks to look at the moon, and he wanted to show that moon is not perfect. Moon is just like Earth. It has got ups and downs and craters and whatnot. And church did not believe that in their dogmatic tendency. Guess what? And that's how, by the way, Aditya, I would say we have a many Mahabharata dating researchers like that, who would refuse to see, who would refuse to accept, who would refuse to read astronomy reference from Mahabharata, because as soon as they read it, they realize all that they are claiming is fake. Ditto, the church authorities refused to see through the telescope of Galileo. Now, that was crude. But even with that crude telescope, you could see that the surface of the moon is not perfect. But that would immediately, instantaneously falsify what the church authorities held as a dogma, that this one is the place of sin and all that philosophy number of you would be aware of. But something out there, everything out up there is a perfect. And that was a dogma. And that's what actually Galileo was disproving. Therefore, they refuse to see through the telescope. And they were a very crude telescope. These are better pictures. And of course, you can see much better pictures too. And I do have them, but not ready here. So this is that Tamra Aruna Shikha of a Jupiter. But more excitement fun is coming. Okay, so when did Galileo did this? Sometime in the 17th century. You can say early 17th century, 1609, 1610, somewhere there. Let's quickly look at exploring the satellites. Ditto for the Saturn, so it's not a big deal. Quickly, so that even in modern times, what is possible? So simple question, and you can type this in the Google. Actually, I did that. Before presenting, I wanted to see, what generic Quora type of not very enlightened answer, but sometimes useful answer pops up. I just put in a Google, how many of Saturn's moon can I see through a telescope or something of that effect? And the answer came with one article exactly with that title, more or less. There are 7 of Saturn's moon. And I thought, wow, what a coincidence. I mean, I was just doing this to see what Google spits it out. And then in that context, talk about the 7 hands of Saturn. Lo and behold, you can just type this and see, you will get it in the Google afterwards, guys. So I thought, what a nice coincidence. It says there are 7 of Saturn's moons, which you can see through a 6-inch reflector telescope under dark skies. And then the names of them are given. This is how typical a picture, again, with a very high resolution telescope and whatnot. Now, the mystery comes. So as far as, because to the modern mind, okay, the modern sort of a post-modern, deracinated, sort of a twisted, it's not individual's fault. That's how our education system, unfortunately, has become, outside and inside the schoolroom. We have been told, hey, there was nothing there. Suddenly we were all like jumping like monkeys, and suddenly some magic happened, the magic wand, and we became modern. I mean, the new era of a modern science came into being. That is far from the truth. And this is one example of it. I'll give you the date of it, but I want to mention something quickly. Read this. This is the paper. This is written by a Colonel T.D. Pierce. He was a military officer on part of British government in India. Remember the discovery process and exploiting the world, colonial times. So he was there. They are exploiting everything, the knowledge, the raw materials, resources, food, spices, everything from India, torturing, okay, basically oppressing the local population, making themselves rich in the process. They were aware. Now, the British education system deracinated Indians to such an extent that majority of the Indians thinks India is like India's past Indians, where their grandfathers and great grandfathers were all backward folks. Okay, and all the wisdom is outside India. But what the Colonel Pierce is writing is this: the paper. This is from Dharampalji's book. Again, those of you who are interested, Dharampalji wrote 5 volumes. I'll not digress and explain more. Dharampal is what you need to type and read. Read all his 5 books. Sent by him to the Royal Society, London. Okay, so this letter was found out by Dharampalji from the British Library, and he literally wrote it with his hand that time, because the photocopy technology did not exist when he did it. And the library would not allow taking out the material to be taken out. Okay, so he used to sit there day in, day out. So this letter, surviving in their archives, refers to Indian knowledge. This is that 4 dancing girls. Indian knowledge of 4 satellites of Jupiter and 7 satellites of Saturn. Now the fun is not over, guys. Okay, you say, so what? Maybe they learned from Galileo, and maybe they learned from who is the guy, Herschel. Therefore it's very important. 7 satellites of Saturn. Pierce further felt that the Indians must have possessed some kind of telescopic instruments, and his hunch is correct. Now, his timing wouldn't be correct. He must be thinking maybe the Indians had this 1,000 years ago, 500 years ago, 2,000 years ago. I'm saying Indians had this, a documented evidence in support of it, at least 7,500 years ago. Okay. Pierce further felt that the Indians must have possessed some kind of telescopic instruments to have acquired such detailed knowledge. Okay. The authors of Pierce memoirs. So what we are going to read is from somebody who wrote Pierce memoirs, which, while including a slightly modified version of this piece in the memoir, states this. So this is a letter, as is the letter preserved, and what he wrote in the memoirs, I will read it on the next page or so. I don't want to read everything, but this is a discussion between the Colonel Pierce. Okay, so let me read something. Yeah, just let's take that time. This is Pierce writing to Secretary of Royal Society, London, and note down the date, very important, 22 September. That's not as important as the year 1783. Please remember this. So Pierce is writing to Secretary of Royal Society. Yet I really had not time to translate it, except the small part that ascertained the age of the book and the account of Saturn, in which there is not, however, any mention of the satellites or ring or anything else, and the account of his periodic time is erroneous and plainly relates to the 7th planet, the period of which is about 60 years. This is also confusion, but I will avoid it. Okay. I mean, Saturn's period is not that difficult to measure. So when he's saying 60 years, what Pierce is thinking is that the local village astrologer is giving him 60 years for Saturn. That guy is not giving it for Saturn. He's actually talking about something else. Saturn is very easy to see. Look what he's saying, and which is very seldom seen. So actually, Pierce is understanding that. Maybe it was lost in translation. This particular village astrologer is referring to a planet which is outside Saturn. So you Saturn, then Uranus, Neptune, Pluto. What is the brightness magnitude of Uranus? 5.9, about 6. Totally dark sky is good eyesight. You can see a star with magnitude of 6. And actually, there are sightings of Uranus all around the world before it was officially identified and discovered, because they may not know exactly what it is. But that's a digression, so I will not go there. And this village astrologer is saying 60 years, but it's seldom seen, so it's not a good number. Now we know Uranus is 84 years, but let's move on. This discussion is also happening before kind of official Uranus, Neptune, Pluto, and they were all discovered. Okay, Uranus might have been discovered by this time. Precisely for that reason, Pierce is making sense of it. It makes sense to Pierce. Otherwise, Pierce would say, "Well, I don't know which planet this guy, this crazy fellow, is referring to." That fellow, Pierce, has a great admiration because Pierce knows that knowledge has not transpired to Indian villages or even to anyone in the city of India. Even in Europe, the people are not 100% sure that it is a planet and they're still observing and so on. So therefore, Pierce is amazed. Okay. So anyways, but let's move on to the 7 hands of Saturn, which is very seldom seen. And when seen is deemed ominous to the world in general. So says the learned Brahmin with whom I talked. Okay. The instant I saw the figure, it struck me as emblematical of Saturn and as represent. Now, this figure unfortunately is lost. Okay, both the figures that Pierce refers to, 4 girls shown as dancing around Jupiter and 7 hands of Saturn. He sent the figures to Secretary of Royal Society, but Dharampal couldn't find them. Okay, as representing him possessed of what till very lately we were ignorant. We, as in Europeans, as in British. I mean his satellites and ring. Hitherto, only 5 satellites have been seen by Europeans. This is referring to Saturn. He is here represented as having 6, and their names, I presume, are expressed by the figures held in the hands. The arms show that these bodies are movable but cannot separate from the planet and are capable of various motions within certain distances. Please pay attention. The 7th, so he mentioned there are 6 hands with holding certain things. He says the 7th hand holds the crown, which is divided into 4 parts. And this I suppose to mean the 4 concentric parts of the ring. The takeaway is that Saturn is described here with 7 hands. Okay. And of course, the Jupiter with 4 dancing girls. It will come. Now, this is the person who is writing the memoirs for the Pierce is saying, we cannot pass this interesting communication without offering some reflection about the subject it embraces, the circumstances of 4 girls dancing around the figure of Jupiter. Now, we saw the 4 key moons of Jupiter and dancing. What a beautiful metaphor. As they ought to be according to the Brahmin statement to Colonial Pierce, is a strong argument in favor of the superior knowledge of the heavenly bodies which the ancient Arabians and Hindus possessed. Now, why they're mentioning Arabians? Rightfully so, because the knowledge, much of the knowledge of the sophisticated astronomy came to Europe through Arabs, okay, via Cordoba, via Spain. And I should also mention, by the time even it went to Arab, even as close to India, which was Iran was almost part of India, even it got modified, it got simplified, which is not any different than even if you see today, people of India, like me and Aditya and so on, in spite of a sophisticated knowledge of astronomy, what we use is very basic, like a name of the month, planets, which position for astrological purposes, and tithi, and nothing more than that. When especially it went even further places where the tithi is also not important, they started losing that sophistication. So by the time it came to Greece, it came to Rome, it has lost much of its sophistication. Even it has generated a confusion. And same thing happened with Arabs taking it to Spain, and from Spain it is getting into the Christian world. Okay. Now Arabs were decent astronomers, okay, especially until sort of a secular attitude prevailed. And so some of these great astronomers had to face the wrath of the religious Islam. Okay, I mean, but that's a different history again. Quickly, the four dancing girls evidently represent the four satellites of Jupiter, and these circumjovial satellites, okay, let's see, were not known in Europe before, yeah, there you go, before year 1609, and the third and fourth only are visible, and this but rarely and in the clearest atmosphere to the naked eye. So they were not known until 1609. And even afterwards, even if someone wants to confirm it, very rarely they could see more than two. Okay. And even when Pierce is writing this, or even when the memoirs of Pierce are being written. Quickly, last one. But it is truly interesting and curious that the figure of Saturn should be represented with 7 arms. At the time, Colonel Pierce wrote his letter to the Royal Society. This is the person who's writing the memoirs and maybe possible notes of Dharampalji. The sixth, now this is very fascinating again, as if like the four dancing girls is not fascinating and 7 arms of Saturn are not fascinating. The sixth satellite, when this discussion was written, when Pierce wrote the letter, very important, guys, where he's writing Saturn with 7 arms, the sixth satellite of Saturn had not been discovered. Only 5 had been discovered. It was first discovered by Herschel on 28th August 1789. Now compare that with 1783 when Pierce wrote the letter from India. And go further. And the seventh satellite, which the seventh arm of the figure without dispute must be intended to represent, was not discovered by Herschel until he had completed his grand telescope of 40 feet focal length, when it was first observed by him on 17 September. So same year, 1789. So, and Pierce wrote that letter with the figure of Saturn with 7 arms about 6 years before this. In fact, there are other additions. I don't know if it is written here. Let's see. Okay, it's not written here, but there are therefore enough people who have conjectured that this particular figure and this particular letter reaching Europe, Herschel becoming aware of it, might have actually led Herschel to improve the magnification, look at the Saturn, which is to say what? He has received a prediction about 7 satellites, 7 moons of Saturn from India, and now he's trying to in a way validate, and he was successful. So something that he has to do with a telescope. We are talking of not that long ago, 1789, guys. Okay, 1789. So that's 1800, 1900, 200 years ago we are talking. He had to, he couldn't figure out the 7th moon of the Saturn until he could complete his grand telescope. That's the context this particular memoir guy or Dharampalji is writing this. Quickly, last one. All the satellites of Saturn are so small and the planet is so remote from the Earth that the best telescopes are necessary for observing them. What does that tell you? Ancient Indians had a tremendous, precise, amazing telescopic ability. Now, of course, as far as this is concerned, definitely before 1789. Okay, that's the timestamp is so important. Notice why history is important. If suppose this letter was not there, just imagine. Okay, let me just complete this. So you can read that. Undoubtedly, the ancient astronomers must have possessed the best instruments, probably differing from modern ones, but fully as powerful. Could be the yogic drishti. I mean, we can speculate. My point is, just imagine for a minute, because that is how the Western academia and their lackeys in India fight. Anytime you talk about some amazing knowledge of ancient India or any other ancient civilization, they said, where is the proof? Of course, there is a proof. Now, if you burn the proof, if you destroy the proof, and then you ask for a proof, that is like Adityaji, what you said, yap peace with your mouth, but do everything against the peace. Okay, it's like that. So fortunately, this letter survived. But just imagine if this letter had not survived. But in some village of India or in some place of India, the oral tradition had continued that, oh, yeah, somebody will say, my great grandfather used to talk about seven hands of Saturn. Or somebody says, my great grandmother used to talk about four dancing girls around Jupiter. If this letter had not survived from peers, now thanks to the British Library, I would say, they understood the importance of it. Our many of our contemporary Indians are so deracinated. Okay, Hindus do not understand. They will take a very we just Pracham created sahibs who never left. That inferior attitude is so deep rooted that many Indians take pride in their inferiority. Can you imagine this? That's how sad situation is, guys, especially among the so-called educated and rich people of India, the middle class and then the higher middle class and so on. Okay, it's an extremely servile attitude, but almost what a pathetic situation. They take pride in their inferiority complex. Go figure. Okay, but what if this letter had not survived? Back to the subject. And somebody just saying a oral tradition, say, oh, my great grandpa used to talk about Saturn with seven hands, or my great grandmother used to talk about just four dancing girls around Jupiter. Nobody will say, yeah, these Hindus, these Indians, yeah, anytime we discover something new, they will always come and say, oh, it is there in the Vedas, or it is there in some book, and so on and so forth. The difference is the Indians can still show that it is there in the books. Now, of course, things are lost, like that picture of Saturn with seven hands and four dancing girls. Or if it exists, I'm not aware of it. But the point is, thankfully, I mean, I cannot thank enough whatever the Colonial Pierce was thinking, or the person who wrote the memoirs of his, and the British Library for preserving it. Now, their intentions may be different. But precisely and only because of that reason, I can actually, Adityaji, take this piece and put in front of these so-called educated Indians, Hindus, okay, middle class, upper middle class, rich, super rich, who just take pride in their own inferiority creation of their own, of course, what you call accelerated by the British education or the Western education. But it's so pathetic. It's so sad. And you know what? It's amazing. Once the person is brainwashed, even when you tell this, the guy is going to just scoff at you. Because they with that kind of inferiority, they have lost the sense of what is scientific acumen, what is a vijnana buddhi. They have lost the logical reasoning skills. I keep on talking about these guys because I see this everywhere. Practically every interaction that I have with Indians, I'm an Indian. Every interaction that I have with Indians, I see it. And of course, I mean, I'm blaming wherever it's worthy of blaming, like the oppression by the colonial people and so on, even ongoing oppressing things. But I'm also talking of the responsibility that the individuals, I'm talking of India, but this applies to all the countries of the world. And this is not like always looking at somebody and just blaming them. I mean, this may have happened, say, 100 years ago, 200 years ago. Yes, you might have suffered because of it. But now what stops you? And what is it that still stops you from waking up from your nightmare and getting rid of that inferiority complex? I mean, don't become aggressive and stupid and arrogant and cocky. That's not the message here. But for heaven's sake, put some damn efforts and learn about this. So my thanks to likes of Colonel Pierce and the person who wrote the memoirs and the Oxford Library, so not Oxford, the British Library for preserving this, and a great sage, Adityaji, you call me Rishi Muni, Dharampalji. We have to start saying and educating people on who Dharampalji was. Absolutely hard work, phenomenal tapasya that he did. That's why, I mean, otherwise, Aditya, you and me wouldn't have ever known that this existed. This is how fascinating it is. Anyways, that's where I want to stop. Back to you, Aditya. and we can conclude. All right, you Aditya, you may be on the mute. Yeah.
Thank you so much. I'm back. Actually, I'm not mute, but it takes some seconds to
Okay.
get the thing back. Okay, so the one question, very fascinating, and Dharmpalji, you mentioned, I have read his works, and it's amazing he has written. One thing, I have a question here, that when a general question comes in, that the stars' positions become repeats all the time.
Mhm.
Planets repeats all the time, and the same uh, like arrangement of stars can happen again also.
Yeah. Yeah.
So how many times have you recorded the same arrangement of stars in the history?
Great question. In fact, and I'm glad you asked that. We let's use this time, and I have done this many times, but again, it's like a chanting. We have to keep on doing it. Because when you think we have gotten rid of that ignorance, then it emerges.
Yeah.
The assumption or a mainstream belief that in astronomy everything repeats, okay, is a lie.
Question.
Okay, it's a complete lie. Okay, and that has created atrocious nonsense among the so-called educated, including astronomers, astronomy professors, Sanskrit pandit, okay, and folks in between who are clueless, but they think they know everything. Now, what repeats? Sun completes one cycle in 365 days, right? That's a 1 year. Moon completes one cycle in 27 through the nakshatras. Okay. If you go through the 12 cycles of the moon and start again, yeah, you're going to have a month of Kartik this year and month of Kartik next year. A full moon near Kritika and full moon near Mrugashirsha. Even if their positions change, if you give 10, 15 years, they will also come to the similar position. So, in that sense, seasons repeat. The spring season comes after 1 year and fall season come after 1 year, exactly that time. So in that sense, because these are all due to astronomy, by the way, the position of the sun and inclination of the earth. So yeah, those things repeat. But what we are looking at in terms of the specific what you call the combinations, that's what you just said. I hear that all the time. People will say, oh, but these all planetary description that Vyasadeva has given in Mahabharata or Valmiki ji has given in Ramayana. Well, astronomy, everything repeats, and therefore this must have happened many times. Whoever says that is atrociously nonsensical stuff, stupid stuff, absolutely useless lie. They have no clue what astronomy is. Now, as I said, there are some things that repeat. Saturn also will complete one cycle after every 30 years. Jupiter will complete 12 years. But if you look at all the combinations, even the nakshatra, no ksharati iti nakshatra, because it doesn't move, therefore it's called nakshatra. I mean, we will go on another tangent. Rupa Bhattiji possibly has covered the Swati, the flight of a Swati, I think,
Correct.
right? This is a history. I mean, right now I talked about 7,500 years ago what Vyasa saw, Tamra Arunashiko. If you look at what Rupaji has looked at, we are looking at 60,000 years. Swati was a pole star 60,000 years ago. And from there, it is taking a flight that Hanumana is referring to 14,000 years ago. He says from Mahendra Parvata, that I think you were there not that long ago. From Mahendra Parvata, he says, now I'm going to take a trajectory to Ravana's Lanka, not to confuse with Sri Lanka. I'm going to take a trajectory to, otherwise, why would he jump from Mahendra Parvat towards Sri Lanka? I mean, he shouldn't go there. He's going further southwest, but that's different point. He's saying, I'm going to take a trajectory like a Swati Ivambare, the way Swati has traveled in the sky. Now, this is he's saying 14,000 years ago, but something now that you asked, I mean, therefore, let me mention. So that goes back to 60,000 plus years of astronomy observations in ancient Indian astronomy. But that Swati is so well known. And also this axis, by the way. See, the European, I mean, the Ptolemy and Hipparchus or whoever, they did not even know. And even when they finally had some inkling that maybe there is this precession of the equinox, their numbers were very bad, like, 1 degree in 100 years and so on. But guess what? Indians knew the exact inclination, the 24.5 degree, the highest inclination the earth can have. And when that happened, this was about 8000 BC, which is to say 10,000 years ago. They said this is the time to recalibrate the nakshatra latitudes again. This is a paper by Anil Narayanan. Okay, and those people who are stuck into another dogma of a peer-reviewed papers, this is a peer-reviewed paper, by the way, that beautifully shows because of Swati, Adityaji, because of Swati, you can show that these all the measurements of latitudes for nakshatra that are existing in Surya Siddhanta were made 10,000 years ago. 10,000 years ago. Therefore, when I say 10,000, I say scratching the surface. So quickly summarize the answer. Everything repeats in astronomy is a lie. Okay, it's a fakery. People don't, those whoever says it, whoever claims it, do not understand astronomy. Back to you.
No, you are right, because otherwise, why will Vyasdev mentioned a very special constellation? Otherwise, see, I'm coming to the same answer, because the Vyasdev and Valmiki, when they mention these nakshatra, they say this is a special one. Like they
Hmm.
say this happened only once. And like the Balram's birth is one nakshatra during that time. That combination
Hmm.
never repeats. So that's why it is said that why the nakshatra position is there, because it will all point to one date only.
Mhm.
So that's why I was asking that question. So thank you so much, Nilesh, as usual. Very educational for me as well, and for others who are watching the show. Please do like, subscribe, and share, and widely. Do share it widely. And there is a whole playlist of 5561 by Nilesh Oak on the channel. You can share that playlist and see all the videos, 112 videos together. Namaste. Thank you.
Namaskar.